In this video, I'm going to demonstrate doing a mask in Photoshop where the edge of the object isn't smooth and clear. So the first thing I want to do is get a quicker selection of the foreground. And thinking about what's in this photo, I'm not going to have much luck with the magic wand or the quick selection tool because the foreground and background are very similar colors. I could just go right to the brush and start painting over all of this, but there's a faster way, which is starting with a path. So I'm going to go to my Paths tab, create a new path, and then I'm going to get my pen tool and make sure to zoom in on this image. Usually at least 100%. This is a very small image, so I'm zoomed into 300%. And I will just draw around the outside of the foreground that I want to select. So just like anytime I'm using the pen tool, I am aiming to use as few points as possible. And to move there on the screen, I'm just going to hold down the space bar and then I can move which part of the image I'm viewing. So I'm not aiming to get this path absolutely perfect the first time around. That is probably not going to happen. So I'm going to come back when I finish this with the white arrow tool and clean up the path before I then alter the edge. So when I get here at the end, I'm going to make sure that I close this path. Get that ring next to the pen tool. So now I have a closed path. So now I'm going to tap the A key to switch to my direct selection tool. And in Photoshop, the direct selection tool is pretty much only used on these paths. So I'm going to come through here and clean up and perfect where this path is going. Areas like this where the edge is really soft, just get close where you have to come back and refine this with a brush. So this area in particular has a lot of these little hairy pieces. So I'm just going to get close to the edge. And I'm going to leave this piece in so that I know to look for it when I'm doing my brush work. Okay. So once you're happy with the path, I'm going to, on a Mac command on a PC, Control click. So I'm going to hold whichever key applies to you, and I'm going to click right on this path thumbnail, and that will give me my marching ants. So what I've done there is I've made a selection of my foreground, so now I can click on the mask icon, and that will get my background hidden. And I'm going to make sure that my layer mask is the one selected. It has these corners around it that show me that it's selected. I'm going to switch to my brush tool. You can always tap the B key if you can't easily find it. And I'm going to go to this top edge, which was softer. And I need to select the right brush size and the right hardness for this job. So make my brush a bit smaller, and I'm going to reduce the hardness as well so it has a much softer edge. So I'm going to start with this and see how it goes. And I will make sure that my foreground color is white and my background color is black. So I'm going to go with white on the foreground, and I'll make sure my opacity is 100%. So I'm going to switch my foreground and background to the default colors. So white in the foreground and black on the background. And I'm going to go with white. So this is going to expose parts of the image. And I'm going to mostly brush over what's already been masked and try to expose some of this softer edge. Now up here in this spot, I'm going to need a smaller brush because my brush is just too big to do that work. So I'm going to use the left bracket key, which is right next to the P key. And if I tap that, my brush will get smaller. So this may take a couple tries until you've figured out the best size for the job that you're doing and the best hardness. It's just going to depend image to image. And remember, if you're unsure of your edge or you make a mistake and bring in some of the background, you can always switch to black and paint that out. So the quick way to switch those foreground and background colors is to tap the X key. So that automatically switches my foreground to black, and I can paint out the stuff that I don't want. And I can tap X to swap back again, so white is in the foreground, and I can go back to painting in this edge. Now when I get to this area, I'm going to need a much smaller brush, but I'm also going to need it to be quite soft. I'm going to come back in with a bit larger brush and really just use the edge of that brush to soften these little hair-like pieces. Now the bottom of the leaf was not nearly as blurry as the top edge, but I can still use this brush to refine that edge. So I've been using this brush on the top, and it has this soft edge on it. I don't necessarily want that here. So I'm going to go back to my brush settings and increase the hardness quite a bit. So that way when I paint this back in, I can take a look at the edge and switch to my black foreground color and paint this out. And again, it may take a couple of tries to figure out which hardness is going to be the best for that particular image. So I'm just going to soften up some of the harder parts here, make this look a little bit more natural. And you can always take a little too much away and then paint back in. And go back and forth until you get the right feel. I see a piece here I need to work on. So zoom back in and get my brush tool back. That hardness back down. And use a bit of a bigger brush just to soften this edge in general. So once you're satisfied with what you've got, you can then move that piece into its new home. So I'm going to use the Move tool. I'm going to click and hold on my object, drag it up to the tab of the document where it's going, come into that document, and then release. And there I have my leaf. So because of the brushwork we've done, if we zoom in on this, you can see that we've maintained the more natural edge along here, especially the top where it was a little bit out of focus. And then this edge here remains fairly crisp like it was in the photograph. So when we brought this in, Photoshop brought its mask along with us. So even at this point, if I see something I don't like, I can select that layer mask thumbnail. It's important to make sure you're on the layer mask before you paint. I can switch back to my brush tool, check and adjust your settings. Make sure you've got the right foreground and background color, and you can come in and edit that mask still. Now, if this is a major adjustment and you're planning to use this piece of the image elsewhere, it's probably a good practice to come back and edit the mask on your original. That way you won't have to edit it every time you pull it into a new piece, if it's an edit that you're going to want to make every time you use it. So now that this is in my document and I'm happy with the masking on it and I'm ready to use it, that's when I'm going to right or control click on this layer in a spot where I'm not on one of the thumbnails, and I'm going to convert it to a smart object. So this will get rid of the mask, but it's also going to save the resolution in here. So if I make this smaller and then larger again by doing Control or Command T, it's not going to throw away resolution like it would if I didn't make this a smart object. We can see we've maintained the soft edge as well as these little hairy pieces of the leaf, all by using a quick combination of the pen tool and the brush tools to get the best mask on this object.